on time by the due date for maximum credit and in the requested file formats. So last week I said, make sure you, whatever you do, go get yourself Photoshop, or at least start with the downloading and have the Photoshop ready to go. Something else I'm going to show you here. I'm just going to click to this folder because on my desktop, I've created a folder called Exploration of Media Tools. And you can see here, each assignment has a folder, and you can start to go ahead and propagate those folders. So you can even get a head start in doing your research, right, on what you need. So if it's Photoshop, you can see here, because this is assignment 1, I've already got some simple sketches loaded up that I can work with. Okay, you can go here to, like I say, next week, photo manipulation, have some damaged photos you can find on Google, image search, or maybe you can scan them or photograph ones that maybe your parents or grandparents have, and even start to gather resource files for doing the manipulation. By the time we're even up here in the Premiere Pro, we're working with video. You can see I've got video clips saved. I've got photos in here that I already work with for the slideshow. I've even got some audio and sound effects and music to play with. So it's just good practice, like I said, to create a project folder for everything, because if you don't designate onto your desktop a project folder for each of this, things get lost. They get forgotten. They get left behind and say the download folder, or into the wonderful world of My Documents, where everything gets lost, because My Documents is typically the default place for things to save. And more importantly, as we save, a lot of these software packages actually have autosave function. So if they have autosave and you haven't designated where it's going to save to, you will lose that file, because they'll probably, like it said, autosave to wherever your file started, or My Documents, or some world lost on your system. And I actually reinforce this again, even with my students that are on campus, because they're working on an on-campus student computer, that they have no control over. You can't customize it. So it's nice to just learn to be able to organize your file projects, manage it. And if you actually understand here, like I said last week, even in an online world now where people are remote, I mean, I know people that work for like Industrial Light Magic or Pixar or, EA Games, they're all over the world now. They're working remotely, and they all have to work from a common server. So file management is even that much more important. So just good practice to start building folders on your desktop, okay, that you can actually back all this stuff up to. You could also do it to a portable drive. I would not work directly from the cloud to the cloud, just because as we get into some of these video files, there might actually be some lag or some buffering issues, as you're, because you have to upload and download and save to remote online, and that can be kind of heavy and tasking to your computer. Now, a couple of ways to launch Adobe. You can, again, I'm on a PC, so I could actually just type in, actually let's just back up here and say photo, P-H-O. Some of you might be able to go to your Windows. Again, you would go, if you're on a Mac, you would go to your apps, and you see, if I type that in, eventually I can launch the Photoshop here. Me personally, I like loading my most common software down at the bottom here on my taskbar. You can also pin a shortcut key to your desktop, and that way it's a quick way to just grab it and launch it. So let's take a look at what Photoshop's all about. Kind of look at this interface and figure it all out. Photoshop, guys, is a beast of a software. It is probably the largest software in the entire Adobe cloud, because it has so much associated with it. Not to mention, there's a lot of other software packages that are, their tools are plugged into Photoshop as well. So again, you could do photo editing or video editing, animation, and all that in Photoshop itself. Now, this is your typical splash page here. And what's pretty cool about this, guys, is it shows you what's new. There's also a lot of self-learning tutorials and so on built into Photoshop itself. Like you can see here, there's this new sky replacement tool where it's got an entire library of skies that you can automatically replace. And it's basically taken over the idea of the old textbooks. They used to be called Adobe or Classroom in a Book. Besides that, you also have Adobe Help Online, Adobe TV. But the tutorials are really cool here. They're actually built inside here. Okay, I'm actually going to maximize my screen here. Just X that out. And this is your default page. So you can see there's a whole Learn section here. You can browse tutorials on all these techniques of editing. So the example I've been given lately is it's no different than when you take a photograph with your cell phone. It gives you all these editing tools, right? You can crop, you can adjust, meaning you can make it adjust the brightness, adjust the contrast, make it warm, give it a sepia tone with filters, right? You can add visual different effects to it. You can add text to it. Your phone has those basic apps built into it for photo manipulation and photo editing and so on. And a lot of those tools are actually built off of what Photoshop created 20, 30 years ago. The problem is they're not the professional tools. Photoshop is the professional tool that gives you far more power than just some basic application on your phone or tablet. So you can see here what we've got here just with this. Now, if I basically go back to what I was talking about with the tutorial here, the lesson plan, week 2, the first thing we're going to learn is how to open or set a new file. Because again, if I open a file, I have to live with the size of that file. If I create new, I can set the size of the file I want instead of living with the smaller size of the JPEG. Because believe it or not, we're going to work about 4 times larger than any photograph you can take with your phone. So we typically start here with a create new. And you can see here, I really don't like how this is in my way. Let's see if I can. But you can see here, there are many preset sizes and formats here in Photoshop to work with. Photo, print, art and illustration, web, mobile, film and video. And you can see here a lot of standards for that. Now, our first one it says to work with, though, is actually a camera ready 300 DPI PDF, which is actually a print format. So I switched to print here. And you see it gives me some variations of presets. And if I hit this, I can look at all the presets. There's also templates here. See? So even here, canvas tote bag mockup. Well, believe it or not, we're going to be doing a mockup. That's part of that portfolio proof. We're doing a mockup of putting this, our final design on t-shirts and stuff, but there are some templates that actually are pre-built. Now, according to our thing, like I said, come down here to this. What we need is a 300 dot per inch or pixels per inch CMYK PDF 11 by 17. Now it's not going to be a PDF until we save as later on. But the important thing is when we see CMYK and 300 DPI, it screams print. That is why in Photoshop we've chosen the print. And if I scroll over here, tabloid is the 11 by 17 inch at 300 PPI or DPI. So if I select that, you can come over here and you can see the standards and the settings here. So it is 11 wide by 17 high inches. The problem is that is a vertical or portrait setting. Vertical and portrait setting, guys, is only really for print, and it's typically, again, like letter or it's photos or something like that, right? And that's why it's called vertical or portrait setting. But everything we're going to do in this when it comes to delivery, especially for the web or for video, is horizontal. So we're just going to switch to what's called the landscape or horizontal, and that just switches these over. Resolution, because it's print, is already at 300 pixels per inch or dots per inch. And the color mode currently says RGB, which we want to switch to CMYK. Now it's working in an 8-bit setting, which is perfectly fine for what we're doing. Most of you probably will rarely deal with a 16-bit, and there is that video from last week that kind of talked about the difference between the two, but really 8-bit is all we need to work with. It also shows that a background content is going to be a white background. That is, again, because it says print. However, you can see we can choose a background color, black, transparent, a custom color, and do all this stuff. We're just going to leave it at white. And why is it white? Because when you're dealing with print, it's assuming that most of the time you're going to be printing onto a white page, a white canvas. Okay. When we get into Adobe Illustrator, it'll show us a white canvas, but really that white canvas doesn't actually exist because it's designed for transparency to be printed on anything. So obviously, like I said, if you were to, like, again, put something on a bag or a t-shirt or a label, the last thing you want is a big square white page, right? And then your art on top. You want transparency. So I'll show you where, when it comes to that, we'll take that background away so we don't have to deal with it when it comes to output things with transparency. The last thing I could do here, just to even get started, is give it a name, right? So I could just call this really quickly here, assignment 1, or do this, assignment 1A, and start naming it in a sequence so that you can save in generational issues, so that if you, especially when we do things like editing or animation or compositions, you want to save in generations often so that you can have stages. So if you need to go back to something, and the reason why I like using letters instead of numbers, instead of like assignment 101, is because a lot of software, when it starts to read that 01, 02, 03, thinks you're creating animation or a image sequence, which will open it as a video. It'll actually read it as a moving video, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's like when you number your photos. So be aware. I like to sometimes, when I'm dealing with my project file, name it in a generational of a letter rather than a number. All this done, and you can see there's even some issues here. We can go to advanced options that talks about color profiles and pixel aspect ratio. It's really nothing to worry about here right now with pixel aspect ratio, because that's typically reserved for something like video, or something is filmed for a widescreen, but then in order to fit onto the old school film, it needs to be squashed. So you get different, it's kind of like the pixel. Most of us have a smart TV, and if you look at, it'll show you aspect ratio, and if you hit that button, it'll fit the TV. So if you, instead of seeing the black bars on the top and the bottom, it'll stretch it vertically to fit. That just means that some images are not square pixels. That just means it is a square pixel in size rather than a squeeze or something for pixel aspect ratio. So we just simply come here then, once we've created this setting for a new file, we hit create, and we get our new little canvas. All right. Now, what you're looking at here, okay, is the interface for Photoshop. You know what? Because we can't see it all, I'm actually going to close my annotation. Now, yours may not look like this. And I get students all the time saying, mine doesn't look like this. Okay. And it doesn't look like this because first thing I'm going to show you is the workspace window, workspace. And you see I'm in Essentials. And if I reset Essentials, you're going to see it changes. See that? That is just because Windows Workspace is the way of just what form are you using your Photoshop. And this is going to come in very handy when we go to other Adobe packages, because if we're in After Effects, there's editing, there's visual effects and compositing, there's, typography, there's, drawing, there's, film editing or audio work. So every workspace is just designed slightly different. Don't let it intimidate you. I'm going to show you just the base essentials for this. And something important here, you can see here that you can destroy this, right? What do I do? I've somehow hit a button and I've lost, everything. How do I get that back? Well, again, window, workspace, reset essentials, and you get it back. Okay. Now, some cool things just to show you here on the left hand down the way here are tools. Now, you'll see there's a lot more tools here than what are revealed. Hit this little arrow button to expand it, and you see where we get a lot more visible tools. See, I can even edit the toolbar to make things custom. So what I can do here, even like if I just click on the selection tool, if you hold it down, you get other options. Okay? So let's say the brush, hold it down, you get other tools embedded inside that one tool. Okay? Here is the color picker. If I click on it, we can change colors, and it typically means foreground and background. I can also toggle and switch them. So I can make custom colors and swap them around, or I can hit the reset to black and white by hitting the reset. Magnifying glass is for zooming, okay? Hand is for moving. And you'll see, watch this, it's pretty cool, is if I hover over something, it actually gives me a little tutorial here on what this tool does. I can also click on the Learn More button. Learn more, and it'll actually show me the tutorial on what this brush does. So obviously there's the eraser tool that erases, okay? So I'm gonna come back to a lot of these tools and go through a couple of these that are most important a little later. You see also then across the top, okay, we have information across the top that deals with whatever tool you're using. So again, if I go and I choose the brush tool, I get elements for brush tools. See? Tool preset, brush preset, library or brush settings panel, the mode you're using the brush, the opacity of the brush, the flow of the brush, the smoothness of the brush, and other, angle of the brush. See? Even here, things like symmetry. See? So even on the symmetry, I'll just show you here. Okay? I can do cool, symmetrical, very cool stuff. I'm just going to hit Control A to select all and delete to delete it. And turn off my symmetry. So this bar is representing more information and details about the brushes themselves. Also, over here to the other side, we've got panels such as this little guy, which is your history. You can see here, there's a history of everything I've done. So I'm just going to go back to hit the trash can, and I'm back to my original new file. We've got elements here for color, swatches, gradients, all these presets that are made so you don't have to make them from scratch. Patterns, so you see I've got grass, I've got water patterns, and they're just images that we can paint and work with. We've got properties of whatever it is we have currently selected, okay, or in the layers. So right now it's just the canvas, so it's just showing me again the size, the settings for the canvas. You can also see where I can turn on rulers, I can turn on grid, I can look at transparency, which again, you see if I double click even, I can get into the preferences. And this again are things like scratch discs. So if you need to expand your scratch disc, your units and rulers to go from inches to centimeters or something like that. Here I'll get into, if you want to do something that is non-destructive, we can do adjustment layers for things like brightness, contrast. And that's actually one of the things we're going to start with is talking about how to adjust an image. For example, when you photograph your sketch, or if you're taking a drawing class and they say, I want you to turn in your drawing, take a photograph and submit it, make sure you put your name on it. Well, how do you improve that photo of your drawing? Maybe you have to adjust the brightness contrast or do a levels adjustment because you're like, well, I don't understand. I drew this drawing on white paper. Why is it coming out gray? And that's typically a lighting, a flash, or something like that issue when you take a photo. So I'm going to start actually by improving your sketch or improving your image by doing simple adjustments. Most common, or probably the most important thing in all the things you're ever going to learn in all software for Adobe, the secret of media itself is the layers. Layers allow us to basically make changes and improvements to a pre-existing image or a digital image or a composition. That's literally what you're doing when you're working with layers. Is you're building a composition so you can quickly make changes and manage your image. So think about these people back in the day that would draw a picture on one page. And then the client or whoever would say, oh, I really like the way it looks, but can you move this person or this thing to the other side? No, because I'd have to redraw it all from scratch, right? A digital version where you draw and create all your content on different layers, it's very easy to move something to a different location or change a color or whatever it happens to be. Plus, like I said, we're mostly going to be tracing in Adobe and Illustrator, in Photoshop and Illustrator. So we can actually place embed our sketch, lock that layer, right? And then not accidentally work on that layer or move that layer that we're tracing. And you can see here by default, like I said, it created a white background. But if I hit this, unlock it, and hit the eyeball, you see it's actually a checkerboard. Checkerboard is the universal symbol for transparent. So currently, because I turned off my eyeball, that is what transparent is. Okay. And if I lock it, watch this. If I hit this plus symbol here, creates a new layer. You notice that that new layer is transparent because there's nothing in that layer yet. To remove a layer, we can simply hit the garbage can and hit yes, and it deletes a layer. We've also got some things here for like channels. So because it's a CMYK, the default here is showing all channels. So not only is it showing the beauty channel, which is all the colors that are in this image, CMYK, but then we can look at specific, just the cyan channel, just the magenta channel, just the yellow channel, and think in terms of screen printing or complex printing. A lot of times what they'll do is they'll have to print each of these different as independent channels because each print is a single value of ink. So if you've ever seen like posters be printed or magazines be printed, all colors do not go down at once. It has to go through several drums or several print cycles, each one putting down a value of color. Same thing goes if it was RGB, right? Same thing goes when we're doing like certain kinds of visual effects for video animation. Or if you think about the great process of modern 3D, and I don't mean 3D like making stuff 3D, I mean putting on the goggles, those channels are separated so that each eye has a certain channel plugged into it and your eyes read it. But when you look at an image, it actually puts it back together. And that's how you create that illusion of 3D. And then finally, we have a section here for paths, which I'm not really going to have to get into at all. Here is your actual login, right? Save for cloud, but this is also your login for Adobe. Okay. Along the top, I'm going to go backwards again. So I'm going to go to Windows. So you see here, if there's not a window over here, we can find it over here. Like I can pick character. See, and what that did is that is now your text character panel, which is now loaded up. And then you also have your paragraph added into that. So you could even create your own custom workspaces based on the tools that you prefer to use. Let's say if you're doing digital illustration, or you're doing concept art or storyboarding or something like that. So this is where you can load up individual windows. You also see, like when we get to animated GIF, we will turn on the timeline that gives us a time-based media. So we can actually create animations and so on. There's plugins. There's tons of plugins, guys, that you can find for doing really crazy, cool effects and whatnot in Photoshop or batch processes. We're not going to get into plugins because it's just more advanced. Remember, some of you will take advanced classes in advanced Photoshop someday. View is literally your viewport. Now, again, you've got things like your zooms, right? Zoom in, zoom out, which is a control or command if you're on a Mac, plus command control minus to zoom out. To fit on screen is control or command 0. There's also a control or command 1, which is 100%, 200%, print size, actual size, flip horizontally, what kind of screen mode you're in. Okay, so I could even, I'm in standard, I'd go full. There's your, show different things. add my rulers, add snap to issues. So again, if you need things to align and snap to guidelines, think about if you're working with the grids, right? You can have things snap specifically to grids. Maybe you're digitally painting an interior design project that's actually like an overhead that's been drawn on graph paper, you know, like almost like a technical drawing issue. You can do certain snaps like that. Move over to the left, we get the 3D tabs. Not going to talk about 3D in Photoshop whatsoever because they are going to discontinue it because there's no point to it. It really didn't do that much. Okay. Besides, it's better to do 3D in Adobe Illustrator or in an actual 3D software now. Filters, these are all our cool effects. So artistic effects, like if we want something to look like it's, you know, make paint look like pencil or crosshatch, add blur, you know, this is mostly a lot of stuff that we're going to use when we go to the video, photo manipulation and photo restoration. We'll be able to apply like blur to create depth of field illusions, stuff like that. Selection tools. Mostly what's here is select all, which is Control or Command A. It's when you want to select everything on a layer. Deselect, there's also a quick little inverse. So if I select something and then I want to invert it to select everything but it, that's like Shift Control I, or just click inverse here. Select all my layers, right? Sky, see, that's you know, some of these edit quick maps, load, and most of these selection tools, guys, are actually located in these first 3 buttons here. Select, select by box, select by ellipse, or select by lasso tool or polygon lasso tool, or select by object quick or magic wand. We're probably going to see a lot of the magic wand used. It's my favorite. I don't like the quick select. Object select is getting better, but still not that good. And we can also select, ironically, by using the pen tool in Photoshop, which is probably the standard in photo editing of how to cut something out from its background, is actually using the pen tool because it gives us a very accurate way of selecting. Next, we move over to the type panel. And you can see here, again, character panel, paragraph panel. Again, I can get to it right here. I actually can get to it right here. I can actually get to it here by double clicking the T. So just more ways of working with just type and text. And common practice, guys, there's a lot of people that create text boxes like that. I'm not big a fan of it until we get actually into more advanced software, like when we get to the world of InDesign, where it works with containers that we then can put text in it. And you can see what it does when I do that, ironically, is it adds this random Latin fill in the blank, see? And fills it in just to show you the size and the presets of that text. Me, I'm much more of a guy that just likes to click text and starts typing, you know? Right? And again, I'm just undoing. That's actually when we get to the edit, the undo, which is just Control or Command Z or Shift Command Control Z. But you can see some of the things you can do with the type. One of the cool things that's newer here is match font. So if you're actually you find a really cool font and you don't know what's close to it or what it is, that Photoshop can actually try and guess what it is based on the fonts loaded up on your machine or loaded up into Photoshop, into Adobe. Golden rule of fonts, though, I will tell you right here, right now, because even dealing with the professional, I guess, group that I deal with in terms of how to properly teach students and what's the #1 mistake students make a lot with text and font. Do not use fancy fonts. Do not use colorful fonts or use a lot of bright colors. The purpose of text is to read it. Okay, unless you're going for some kind of cool graphic, like, I don't know, like a graffiti or a tattoo, okay, where you basically say, my God, it looks really cool, but what does it say? Most of what you deal with when you're dealing with text in what I'm going to teach this entire semester, especially when we're doing title work for video or your resume or whatever it is, stop using fancy, unreadable fonts. It's the #1 mistake. If you can't read it from 5 feet away, you're failing the purpose of that text. Okay, so you typically keep clean, easy to read font, and the text most popular is the color of white over dark or dark over light. Period. That's it. Okay, keep it stupid, keep it simple. Don't try and be fancy. So just some loading up, and you can see there's even some default types. You can even load more type. If I go there, I can go and find more font in the font library. Next, we get into the layers window. So again, here we got different, make a new layer, make a new background, frame from layers, duplicate layers, delete layers, quick export or imports, rename. These are pretty cool. These are called layer styles or blend modes, which you're going to see in a lot of different uses. Adjustment layers, like I said, how to make an adjustment layer here, vector mask layers, smart objects, rasterize, remember where that's located, smart object and rasterize, because we're going to be placing objects into our file. And when you place a file into your file, place an image, it's placed as a non-destructible smart object, which means it's non-destructible, which means it won't let you edit it until you smart object and rasterize it. See, we can video layers here, so we can place new video layer, group layers together, lock layers, see, flatten, merge. We'll talk about merging layers together. This is where you make multiple layers and do it, but then when the time comes to actually flatten it so that it's all combined in one layer, we can merge, or we can merge visible, or we can flatten it. Next, we move to image. This is our adjustment for the image itself. So you can see this is where we would change something in mode to grayscale, RGB, CMYK, lab or multi-channel, 8-bit, 16-bit. We can apply adjustments. Now, it's not going to give me anything because I have nothing here, but I'll show you. That's one of the first things we're going to do is do adjustments. Contrast tone, image size, canvas size. You'll actually know that there's a difference between the canvas and the image, meaning the canvas is the size of what we're dealing with. The image is the size of the image or the layer we're working with. We can also rotate the entire image, or we can rotate just the layer. We duplicate variables. There's just an analysis. Like I said, there's a lot of ways to play around with different tools here in Photoshop than what I'm just going to show you. Like I said, we'll save a lot of these for when you take that advanced course. Then we get into the edit section. This is where we're editing the content or the layer itself, not the whole image. So we got things like, again, undo, cut, copy, paste. Again, Command Control X, Command Control C, Command Control V. You can search content, fills and strokes. Fills and strokes are very common in vector art. So a fill is the fill that we're filling a content. The stroke is the outline or the outline of the curve around that fill. That is a very big issue when we're dealing with Illustrator, Adobe Illustrator, but also when we're dealing with type. Is type or text will have a fill or a stroke, or can have. Puppet Work's a cool one we'll get to next week. Puppet Work lets you alter and deform by putting pins, so you can deform a character and give it different poses. There's some patterns. There's your sky replacement right there. So of course, that would be something you only work if you have the image loaded with a sky. Patterns. Purge is pretty cool, because purge means I can purge, see, any old history that exists on my machine. So let's say I'm rendering something where I've got presets, or I've got stuff saved because I copied and I've got it saved in the cache. Purge frees up memory. And that's something that I found, particularly in After Effects and Adobe Premiere, that I suddenly found that I had no more memory left on my laptop. I'm like, I'm supposed to have gigabytes of memory. Where did it all go? And finally, I realized that in After Effects and Premiere, I hadn't purged past history, past RAM previews. And because I hadn't purged it, there was something like 35, 40 gigabytes of files that were up to 2 years old still in my temporary memory. Well, I purged it, I deleted it all, and suddenly I had 30 gigabytes of memory back at my fingertips. So it's a nice thing to do, especially if you're dealing with computers that have minimal memory or are older, to free up space. You also see here, we've got, some other profiles here, color settings, right? So we can come in, and again, this is more fancier for fancier print. We've got, different presets, sign profile, color profile, keyboard shortcuts. If you want to customize your keyboard shortcuts, customize your menu, customize your toolbar. And also don't forget, this is also where you have to set your preferences, general preferences. This could be things like, again, your language, because I have students all the time. English may not be their first language, and they may want to set up their files here for Adobe in a different setup. So they can say, oh, French. I've actually seen plenty of students that work in Spanish, work in French on their personal machines. Interface general setups. You've got colored themes. I'm currently at this, right? I can have different highlight color setups, standard screen, full screen. What is the standard? I can go dark theme to light theme. Here it is, language, UI font, user interface font size. Maybe you've got, again, a small computer with a small screen. You want your font to be default a little larger for visual purposes or access. You can, scaling, your workspace, your tools, everything here. Zoom with the scroll wheel. So if I activate that, I can just use my scroll wheel to zoom in and out. Export settings, see, for PNG and other things. Now, this is not how you export. This is just the default settings for your system. Your performance settings, the available RAM. So again, if you are getting errors where your Photoshop or some other Adobe package is saying you have run out of memory, you can increase or decrease. See, so it's letting Photoshop use 60% of my RAM. What's a graphics processor? All these history and cache. I can keep 50 states of history, cache levels of 4. I can come down here to my scratch disk. You can see it's actually using, I have 36 gigabytes available to me on my C drive for my scratch. If you're using other Adobe packages and you get this big old error, scratch disks are full, you may want to clean it up, or in some cases, some computers have a separate scratch disk folder or another drive. You can plug in a separate hard drive that's just used. So buy a terabyte portable hard drive, plug it in, and you could say, hey, I'm going to use this just for Adobe, where it's a spare scratch disk that gives you more space for memory and more space for thinking and more space for temporary storage and whatnot. Here again, cursors, you can see painting cursor, normal brush, full size standard, precise, other cursors, standard or precise, brush previews, things like that. Units, again, inches, you can switch to centimeters. See, new preset resolution is 300. Screen resolution is only 72, right? Because screen resolution is the resolution of your computer screen, which can only be 72, even though we're creating imagery, graphics that are 300. It's kind of like I always said, people that run out and they try, oh, I'm going to shoot an 8K video so I can go and look at my computer. You're not looking at 8K on your computer. You're looking at it at 72. It's just a bigger file. It's still just 72 dots per inch. And then finally, we go to the file folder here, where again, we have new, open, save as, right? Save a copy, export. You can see some of the things. So we're going to use save, and we're going to use save as, and we're going to use export in this process to get to the different file types we need. Here again is where we have the place embedded versus the place linked. We really never really want to use place linked. We want to use place embedded. There's an Adobe stock. That's where you can search for photos and images and audio and video on Adobe stock instead of maybe using Google search. I use Google. There's automations. There's import. Look at this, video frames. We're going to use that when we go into the GIFs or GIFs, how to import video and convert it into layers. And then prints and whatnot, exit. So in a nutshell, the basics of what we're dealing with Photoshop, right? Now, I'm going to go ahead here and just show you the wrong way to start. So let me go ahead. Where's my desktop? Where's my expiration media tools? Where's my Photoshop? And I have a series of sketches here, and I'm going to use this girl right here. Now, again, what you're going to want to do, of course, is get your sketch into your phone, okay? And then put it into a folder here so it's accessible. And I'm going to open this folder or this file. I'm opening it to show you how to adjust and improve a single image. All right, so you see I opened this file. And remember, Control or Command 0 makes it fit. Okay, and you can also see we get this down here that shows the scale of the preview, 179%. Now, this is a common problem here, right? You take a photograph of an illustration, a drawing, an image, to submit it or whatever, and we get the fact that, wait a minute, I created this on a white piece of paper. Why is it all kind of dull? Well, the definition of a proper image, even in the film world, even in the animation world, the definition in photography and illustration and painting, a good image has true white and true black. Well, I've got some true black, but nowhere here is true white. So I have to adjust this. Now let's look at the layer here just to see what this is. And you can see it's currently locked. Now to adjust this, to improve this image, I need to go to image, and you see now it gives me the ability to do adjustments to it. Okay. Now the first adjustment, or the best or easy adjustment here, is to adjust the levels. Now what I'm going to do though is called destructive adjustment or destructive editing, because I'm going to do this to the original. Levels, and you see this weird graph. This weird graph basically is, down here is basically equated to 0, and over here is equated to 1, even though it refers to 255. 0 is black, 1 is white. You'll notice I have a lot of room here to get true black. I have a lot of room here to get to true white. And then the middle one, I can back around to get a much better, cleaner image that looks like what it does on the paper. So again, this is no different than when you do a contrast adjustment or an image adjustment on your phone. Like when you take a photograph of, a friend or I don't know, somebody, and the sun's behind them, and you look at the photo, and because it's exposing to the sunset, and you didn't use a flash, the person's face is really dark. Well, you know what? We'll look at this next week, but usually all you have to do is just move this middle one to say, hey, let me brighten the middle value. Leave the darks, leave the whites, but just brighten the middle value. See that? And I hit OK, and suddenly you can see, oh, well, that's a much better photo or version of the original sketch. But again, it is destructive because I have destroyed it in the sense of it's done to the original. Now I'm going to do something interesting. I want you to select all, copy, go back to now remember, this is my 300 DPI image, and I'm going to paste. Look how small that is. So imagine if we were going to work with the original, and this is a great example here, because let me come down here, and let's say I wanted to draw. Watch if I zoom in, keep zooming in, you're going to start to see these pixels. See that? Now imagine if I wanted to paint or erase, make a new layer just to show you how we work with a layer, right? So we lock the lower layer. But imagine if I wanted to paint this now, just pick a color, any color. I'll make it nice and bright so we can see it. Okay, and you see right now, my brush is currently at 80 pixels. Well, if I was full screen, you'll see how big that brush is. See that? But what if I want to paint a line on her hair here? And you see I'm at pixel level here. Go to the brush. I'm going to have to take this down. What, 18? Okay, that's still too big, right? Keep going. Let's go all the way to 1 pixel. So if you're going to work inside of Photoshop, and this could be even something like using the eraser or using the cut tools, right? And even 1 pixel is still too big, you're working too small. The tools are made for working large. So and enlarging your image isn't really the answer. Okay, so just remember that, because watch this 1 pixel line here. When I go back to full size, you barely even see it. So just remember that. So that is why we don't work small. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of this because I'm not going to open and close them. Now, how do we get that image in here to be the proper size? Like I said, we don't copy and paste. We place embedded. See? Right here, place, and look at that. It automatically knows, hey, the image you're placing is smaller than what you're working at. But we're going to place it to fit the most common size, which is, of course, the height. And now I can just move this around, scale it as I want to on my 11 by 17, 300, place it over there. You hit this select button to see, and that activates it. So that basically places and frees it up. And you notice now, because we've placed it, it's got this bizarre little symbol. Well, that bizarre little symbol means it is a smart object. See, this smart object must be rasterized before editing or proceeding. Contents will no longer be available. Rasterize the smart object. I can hit OK there and do it. Or layer, smart object, rasterize. And you see now that it's taken away the smart object. And now I can do my basic adjustments. See, levels, clean it up a little bit, get me true white. So it's just a better, cleaner version of itself. I can also go back to image adjustment here. Okay. And I've got things like curves, brightness, contrast, hue and saturation. Watch this. If I go to hue and saturation, if I just say desaturate it, it's going to convert it to just a black and white or grayscale, because the photo that it was taken was a normal color photograph, even though the original pencil sketch was just grayscale. So you see, all I did was just back off the saturation. See, I could oversaturate to bring the color out, or I could desaturate to take the color away. Okay, so I've got my sketch placed. I'm going to lock that layer. So it's not, see, I can't, it won't let me move it, brush it, paint it. It is locked, just like taping down an image before you trace it. And before I go any further here, I'm going to go ahead and save as. Okay, make sure I'm saving to assignment 1, Photoshop. I'm going to name it what it's already been called, and I'm going to save it as a PSD. Always double check this, because Photoshop will remember the last format you saved it. So I want this to be a PSD because I'm working as a PSD, and I'm not done with the PSD. And when I am done with the PSD, then I can save as or export as the proper file formats as requested in the submission folder. So I'm just going to save it as, right? Hit OK here, and look here in my folder. There it is right there. Okay. So now let's talk about some of these other tools here that are available. So now I'm just going to make a new layer, and I'll call this one the ink, just because that's basically what we're going to do is do black ink. And I want to talk about a little bit here about different ways of working with like these tools. So again, let's say I create a selection tool, which is just a box, right? Now, I've got a couple ways I can work with this box. Go ahead, increase this. You see, because it's selected, I can paint, and it will only paint inside that box. I can create another selection. Change the color just so we can see it. Paintbrush, and I can paint, whoops, let's color, go, see, and paint inside that box. To deselect, we deselect. Now again, that's its own layer here. Watch if I deselect or turn off the background layer here. You see, right, what it is. It's just a couple colored boxes on the same layer. Now, even here, I can select, I can even feather that selection, which it actually has 10% feather. Grab the selection tool, see, and move it. I can even do a select invert, which now is outside of that selection. See? So think about a graffiti artist or a stencil artist, right? That is working with, spray paint, and they can create masks, and they can mask things off and only paint inside what's in or paint what's outside of it. So this is a little bit more on a painting issue as opposed to just a true, inking. Okay, but I wanted to show you how those selection tools work, really in a nutshell. So let's go ahead and turn on our background color. Now, the most common tool, of course, is the brush tool for doing this. You see there is a pencil, there's color replacement, there's a mixer brush. But for purposes for our first project here, we're just going to play with the paintbrush. Now, basics of that paintbrush here, like I showed you before, if I open up the brush settings, we have size. Okay, so I can play around with the size. Also playing with the size, we have hardness values. So if I say 100% hardness, make it a little larger, right? It's a hard edge brush, or I could say hardness of 0, which gives me a soft airbrushy kind of quality. And you can see we've also got a bunch of other brushes here to play with. Now, I've got a lot of different brushes loaded into my software. I'll show you guys next week as well is how to load in special effects brushes. But most of the time, the brush you want is just the general paintbrush, right? Because think of it like a Sharpie mark. So I'm going to leave a hardness value of 100. Okay, I'm going to give it, but look at here. We also have the ability of changing the shape of our brush so that instead of being just round, now I get kind of like a Sharpie marker or a chisel marker or a calligraphy brush style. Go ahead and select all and delete. Okay, just to get rid of what I've created. Go back to our brushes here. There's also a way of loading in, a variety of settings. So you see this is just, smoothing, different brushes you can program. So that's mostly on the digital painting side for those guys that do literally like oil painting, watercolor painting. You can do a lot of cool brush techniques here by adding like color, sketch, watch this. If I do color dynamics, okay, and I say hue jitter, watch when I paint with this. Now, every time I paint, it's going to pick a slightly different hue or value of color. So you can think how you can really do some really neat color painting, especially if you're using a non-simple shape. You're using like a complex brush shape or something like that. Go ahead and turn that off. You also see here, this is your brush library of where you can get all kinds of crazy cool brushes. Additionally, you've got color modes or blend modes you can do with your brushes. I tend to prefer to do that not with the brush, but with the layer. Gives you more control. And I'll do that when I go to paint like highlights or shadows. I'll do a highlight layer and I'll do a shadow layer, and that'll give me the ability of applying opacity or blend modes to that. Here's the opacity of the brush. So again, if I want to paint, but I don't want to paint heavy, which allows me to build up and build up and build up. See? So there's an opacity there, kind of like think about using watercolors or different art markers that you can build up and build up to what you're doing. Back to 100. If you're using pressure sensitivity, you can control the flow. And that simply means that the slower you go, the heavier it is. Okay. I usually keep my flow though just at 100. There's also, you see here, some other little buttons. Again, you pick these little buttons. There's an airbrush option for your brushes, enable airbrush style so you can build up. That's kind of like using the opacity. But perhaps the best one here, my favorite one, and this is kind of like, think about your typical issue you have with a lot of people is, I cannot possibly draw with a mouse. I cannot be that comfortable with a mouse. It's going to be shaky. It's going to be sloppy. Well, the coolest one thing we have here is this smoother. So watch it. I'm going to draw a line like I drank too much coffee, and it's going to be all over the place with zero smoothing. Watch this. Okay. I'm trying to be as accurate and shaky as possible. Now watch this. Let's put a smoothing value here of, we'll say 40% or something like that. Watch, I'm going to do the same action. See that? It's much more controlled. What if I actually move all the way up to like 73%? Now I'm going to get as shaky as possible. You see that? So it doesn't matter how uncomfortable or unconfident you are with using a mouse, you can still create very accurate line work. It just is a little slower and there's a little bit of lag. Watch if I do full 100%. And again, I'm literally shaking this mouse as I'm doing this. See that? Now imagine if I actually try to draw a smooth line and let it catch up. You see, we can create very good, clean, accurate lines. Let me hit Control A. Let me delete it. And you notice when I do that, you still have the marching ants going around because I selected all. I usually just deactivate by clicking off and then going back to the brush together. So 100% is a little bit much for me. I'm pretty confident with my mouse. So I'll leave this down here at about 20. You also see we can change the angle. I'm currently at a 54-degree angle brush. And I already showed you where, again, you've got some other tools here. Like I said, I'm trying to figure out, oh, pressure for size. Oh, okay. So again, if I was using something, now it doesn't work with a mouse, but if I was using a tablet, I can activate pressure. Also, I showed you here where we can actually do, see? See, there's some cool design work there that actually, followed a circle when I did that. That was pretty neat. So you do have some symmetry functions there that do some neat stuff. Just make sure, let's go ahead, turn that off, turn that off. All right. So let's go ahead and zoom in here. I'll actually zoom in and try the frog first. Okay, and I'm going to go back to my brush temporarily. Let's go ahead and make it full circle, see what the size is. And for this, let's go ahead and do default black. Again, I can always change colors later. And I'm just going to go ahead here on my ink layer and use some of these basic tools to trace over what my image should be. And yeah, you know what? I could actually use symmetry on this frog. but I'm not going to. And let's go ahead and fill in these little droplets here. Now, again, I will come back in with a white hot spot or some color. Now, here's a cool issue. I want this to be a straight line. Well, if I click once, hold shift and click again, it draws straight lines. See that? Now, that's pretty cool. Now, I can do a shift click horizontal, vertical, and 45-degree angle with that, but that's it. And that's, again, nice little shortcut to know how to create some straight lines is just holding in shift and click. Now I'm going to come back in here. Let's take this down to an 8-pixel brush. I will do some squeeze so I get some calligraphy to it. And I've got my 54% smoothing. Just zoom out. And I'm just now going to, now you see, I'm trying to trace and I'm like, you know what? That's a little too out of control. Let's go ahead and increase this to 40. Remember, it's just like we're doing a Sharpie marker here. So it doesn't have to be super over the top accurate. We're making, if you hit undo, you can also use the eraser and go back. It might take a few times. It's just like drawing when you're holding the pencil wrong. I'm sure you've had art teachers tell you, you know, hold it loosely. It's kind of hard to do that with a mouse because, well, a mouse is designed for pinpoint accuracy. But remember, we can always go back to an eraser. We go ahead and choose a hard value eraser. And I can go back and clean up areas which aren't very accurate. And this is more, like I say, getting your confidence level. Try going back to a 60 value. See, and you actually let it catch up to you. In fact, let's go ahead and just take this out right here. Now you're going to notice what I'm doing with this is I'm trying to guarantee that when I'm painting here, I'm closing off my pen work. I am not leaving an opening. And that's going to be really important when it comes to filling these, you can almost call them shapes, right? Shapes, filling these shapes with color. And again, the sketch is just that. It's just a concept. It's just a sketch. Oops. Do. Clean up a little better. Remember, accuracy has a little bit of lag behind it. So you're going to want to let it catch up. So when you get to where you're going, just stop and let it catch up to you. I don't have to close off her sleeve there because her sleeves are going to be the same color as her jacket, so I can leave that open. So it's kind of like, again, just getting the accuracy and getting comfortable with the smoother is you can lead it to follow. Then when you get to where you're going, slow down and let it catch up to you. Oops. Let's try it again. Again, watch these guys doing speed paintings, you know, and you're using Photoshop. It's pretty impressive because you can actually see how many times they undo or go back and redraw, even when they're working on a Wacom tablet or something like that. They sit there and redraw the same thing over and over and over and over again. There's my cursor. I lost my cursor. Where it is. Slow down, go back up, slow down, go back out, slow down, back up, slow down, let it catch up. I'm actually gonna leave a little hair like that. All right. So we're just gonna keep going and filling in, you know, even put some little hairs here if you want, kind of some line work. Just inking as if you're using a pen or Sharpie. It's kind of got a little Deadpool hoodie on. All right. I'm looking at the time right now, guys. Go ahead.